One of the things that I find interesting about human beings is that we love to celebrate things, right? We will celebrate almost any type of occasion. Sometimes we celebrate major life events. Other times we will have celebrations that are designed to cause us to remember, and sometimes these can be serious and somber. And sometimes we like to celebrate those things that are just inane, that are almost silly. And I know I'm going to ruffle some feathers with this, but just a few weeks ago, a number of the staff people at Reasons to Believe took a portion of the afternoon to have a dessert and play some games to celebrate Star Wars Day, May 4th. May the 4th be with you. And I find this somewhat amusing because I'm old enough now that I actually saw the original Star Wars movie in movie theaters. And of course, that was the fourth episode, I guess. The first episode is actually the fourth episode. And the Star Wars was a phenomena, and at that time, and has been a phenomena since then. But nobody really thought to celebrate Star Wars Day. And in fact, you can even remember a number of years ago now, where people on May 4th would wish each other happy Star Wars Day, kind of as a tongue-in-cheek type of thing. And now people are celebrating Star Wars Day. It's become an international holiday of sorts. And again, I think that it reflects in part our desire to celebrate almost anything that we can think of to celebrate. And that must tell us something really about who we are as human beings. But there's another holiday that really has a similar type of trajectory as May 4th, as Star Wars Day, and that's Darwin Day. Prior to 2009, people around the world in a scattered type of way would celebrate February 12th as Darwin Day, which is the day that Charles Darwin was born. In 2009, however, the Darwin Day celebrations became an international phenomena because this was the 150th anniversary of the publication of Origin of Species, and it was also the 200th anniversary of Darwin's birth. And those two monumental events triggered literally Darwin Day celebrations all over the world. And since that time, this is considered to be many people a very important holiday that really marks the celebration of Darwin's life and Darwin's legacy as a scientist. And so, particularly on university campuses on February 12th, there will be Darwin Day celebrations. And a number of years ago, I was invited to be part of a Darwin Day celebration in Fargo, North Dakota at North Dakota State University. I ended up debating biologist and atheist P.Z. Myers at that Darwin Day event. And let me tell you, there's no better place in the world to be in the middle of February than Fargo, North Dakota. Man, it was unbelievably cold. It was brutal in terms of how cold it was. But there is a reason why, for many people, the Darwin Day celebrations are important. And it's because they take the view that Darwin's theory of evolution really has become, in a sense, the organizing principle in biology, that it is the lens by which life scientists look at the totality of biology. And you can get a sense for how important people consider Darwin's theory from this well-known statement made a number of years ago by Theodosius Dobzhansky, the famous Russian geneticist, when he said that nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. And what, again, Dobzhansky is getting at is that Darwin's theory has become the framework in which we understand biological phenomena. And in fact, Darwin's theory, when it was proposed, ushered in a revolution in biology that many times is called the Darwinian Revolution. Because what Darwin was doing with his theory of evolution was, first of all, producing an explanation for how species originate. And this is sometimes called Darwin's special theory. And in Darwin's day, the origin of species was considered to be the mystery of mysteries, that Darwin solved with his mechanism of natural selection. But what Darwin did was go far beyond producing an explanation for the origin of species. He again revolutionized biology by arguing that this very mechanism could explain everything we see in biology, that extended over vast periods of time, this mechanism could account for large-scale biological change and could explain the entire history of life on Earth, including the origin of the different major groups of organisms, that this theory could account for the diversity of life and the biogeographical distribution of living organisms on the planet. And that last but not least, that this mechanism could even explain why organisms display an exquisite adaptation to their environment, or why organisms display an appearance of design. That, in other words, what Darwin did is he essentially revolutionized biology by arguing that it was not mind that accounts for the nature of biological systems, but it was mechanism, that Darwin mechanized the life sciences. And because prior to Darwin, biologists viewed biology in teleological terms, where they saw design and purpose, as he revolutionized biology again by supplanting the creator's involvement with the mechanism of natural selection. And Richard Dawkins describes the Darwinian revolution, very, very eloquently in his book, The Blind Watchmaker, where he says that natural selection, the blind, unconscious, automatic process, which we now know is the explanation for the existence and apparently purposeful form of all life, has no purpose in mind. It has no mind, no mind's eye. It does not plan for the future. It has no vision, no foresight, no sight at all. If it can be said to play the role of a watchmaker in nature, it is the blind watchmaker. But this Darwinian revolution was not simply confined to the way that we think about the origin and the history of biological systems. The Darwinian revolution even impacted how we think about our identity and our nature as human beings. Because prior to Darwin, again, most people would have held to, at least in the Western world, would have held to a biblical perspective on human origins and human identity and human nature. But what Darwin did is, a number of years later in his book, The Descent of Man, applied his theory of evolution to the question of humanity's origin, where Darwin in The Descent of Man writes these famous words in a series of forms graduating insensibly from some ape-like creature to man as he now exists. It would be impossible to fix on any definite point when the term man ought to be used. And what Darwin was arguing here is that while we may think of ourselves as human beings as exceptional, as unique, as having certain qualities that separate us from all other creatures, what Darwin argued is that, in fact, we are really only different in degree, not kind, from other creatures. That the qualities that we think that make us unique as human beings have their antecedents in creatures that precede us in our evolutionary history. That Darwin argued that everything about us as human beings ultimately is the product of an evolutionary history, and that as human beings, we are no different than any other creature or any other organism on the planet, in that we are the product of, again, mechanism, not mind. And that we are part of the evolutionary tree of life. And that in reality, we are really minor players in this evolutionary drama, where we appear late on the scene, and we are just a minor twig in this vast evolutionary tree of life. And in fact, when we think about and understand the nature of the evolutionary mechanisms that biologists employ to account for origins, we see even a more devastating reassignment of our place in the cosmos when we understand that evolutionary mechanisms are unguided, they're undirected, they are historically contingent, predicated on a sequence of chance events, and that if we could somehow rewind the tape of life and replay it, the outcome would be very different, that we are a happenstance of nature. We're not an end goal. We're not a purpose that is embedded within the nature of the universe. Stephen Jay Gould, in his book, A Wonderful Life, says this: we must face the implications squarely. The origin of Homo sapiens is a tiny twig on an improbable branch of a contingent limb on a fortunate tree lies well below the boundary. In Darwin's scheme, we are a detail, not a purpose or an embodiment of the whole, with the details, whether good or bad, left to the working out of what we may call chance. In other words, what Darwin's theory has done when it comes to our view of human nature and human identity is essentially leveled the playing field. That as human beings, we are no different than any other creature on the planet. We are not made in God's image. We are not exceptional. We are not unique. We don't have a special status within the creation. And the implications of that thinking are profound. But one of the implications, one of the ways in which this idea cashes out, is that to claim that human beings bear God's image, that we are exceptional, that we are unique, that we have some kind of special place within the cosmos, is to make a statement of high arrogance. That this is considered by many people to be an incredibly offensive idea, an incredibly offensive statement that is described as speciesism, that in the view of many people is on par with committing statements or acts of racism or sexism. And again, this idea is not just an idea that is residing in the academy or within the evolutionary sciences. This is an idea that is permeating our culture at large, and with it is undermining essentially the dignity and the value and the sanctity of human life, of human existence. And so the question really on the table is this: from a scientific perspective, is it true that we really only differ in degree, not kind, from other creatures? And this idea that we differ in degree, not kind, from other creatures has been an idea that has shaped the study of anthropology over the last 150 years. It is the mainstream idea within anthropology. And again, it is an idea that permeates our culture at large. But what's intriguing to me is that in the last decade or so, there is a growing number of primatologists and anthropologists who view human origins through the lens of an evolutionary history that are arguing that the scientific data is really undeniable, that in fact we actually are different in kind, not different in degree from other creatures. And one of the leading voices along these lines is a evolutionary psychologist by the name of Thomas Suddendorf, who in his book, The Gap, makes a case that for human exceptionalism. And this is what Suddendorf writes: we reflect on and argue about our present situation, our history, and our destiny. We envision wonderful, harmonious worlds as easily as we do dreadful tyrannies. Our powers are used for good as they are for bad, and we incessantly debate which is which. Our minds have spawned civilizations and technologies that have changed the face of the earth, while our closest living animal relatives sit unobtrusively in their remaining forest. There appears to be a tremendous gap between human and animal minds. Now, in some respects, you could argue that this is stating the obvious, right? But when you think about this statement being made within the context of the evolutionary framework, this is a radical statement. This is a radical departure from the mainstream. This is a revolutionary idea within the sciences to claim that human beings actually are different in kind as opposed to different in degree. And Suddendorf argues that there are two major features that set us apart: our open-ended ability to imagine and reflect on different situations, and our deep-seated drive to link our scenario-building minds together. In other words, what Suddendorf is getting at is that there is a collection of attributes that we have as human beings that that actually separate us, distinguish us from all other creatures. It's our ability to represent the world with symbols, and to even represent abstract ideas with symbols, and then to manipulate these symbols in an open-ended generative way to create alternative scenarios, to imagine what could be, not only to describe what actually is, to reflect on the past and to anticipate the future. We also have theory of mind, in that we recognize that others have minds like us, and that we can understand what they are thinking and what they are feeling. And in fact, that we desire to tether our minds together through complex social networks. That these collection of qualities are uniquely possessed by human beings, and distinguish us or separate us from all other creatures. And what this means is that the behaviors of animals that many times have been interpreted as the antecedents to the qualities that make us unique as human beings actually are fundamentally different than what the attributes we possess as human beings. And so Studendorf argues that while animals may have communication, we have open-ended human language, which is fundamentally and qualitatively distinct from communication that animals display. That we have mental time travel, whereas animals have memory, and these are fundamentally two different qualities. That animals have social cognition, we have theory of mind. That animals can solve problems, but we have the ability for abstract reasoning. Animals have social traditions, we have cumulative culture. Animals may have empathy, we have morality. And the former is not a stepping stone to the latter, but these are fundamentally distinct, divergent capacities that make us, again, unique. In other words, there is a growing body of scientific evidence that is arguing that for our exceptional nature as human beings, that we are indeed exceptional. Now, the qualities that many people believe make us exceptional, that cause us to stand apart from other creatures, could be understood as essentially scientific descriptors of what we would understand to be the image of God. And so you could equate or connect, maybe more appropriately, the idea of human exceptionalism to the notion that human beings uniquely bear God's image compared to all other creatures, that we stand apart from all other creatures because we are image bearers. And here we have the companion concept of human exceptionalism and human uniqueness that is gaining scientific credibility, even within an evolutionary framework. Now, what is also intriguing to me is that attempts on the part of evolutionary biologists to explain these qualities that make us unique, that make us distinct, essentially defy an evolutionary explanation. Our ability to represent the world symbolically manifests in the form of our language, our musical capacities, our artistic expressions. But to me, our language abilities most profoundly exemplify our capacity for symbolism. And when we try to understand the origin of language through evolutionary mechanisms, we fail miserably. There's not an evolutionary explanation for the origin of language. Chris Knight writes this: language evolved in no other species than humans, suggesting a deep-going obstacle to its evolution. One possibility is that language simply cannot evolve in a Darwinian world, that is, in a world based ultimately on competition and conflict. The underlying problem may be that the communicative use of language presupposes anomalously high levels of mutual cooperation and trust, levels beyond anything which current Darwinian theory can explain, suggesting a deep-going obstacle to its evolution. But it's not just simply the fact that evolutionary mechanisms don't seem to be able to account for our capacity for symbolism. It's that when we look at the mode and the tempo for the emergence of language, we see something completely unexpected. Instead of language emerging as simple language that evolves towards a more complex form, we actually see language appearing out of nowhere, coinciding with the origin of humanity, that it appears to be unique to humans, and that the very first language that was spoken likely had the complexity of modern day language. Miyagawa, a linguist at MIT, said this: the hierarchical complexity found in present day language was likely to have been present in human language since its emergence. Or we see people like Ian Tattersall and Noam Chomsky writing this: by this reckoning, the language faculty is an extremely recent acquisition in our lineage, and it was acquired not in the context of slow gradual modification of pre-existing systems under natural selection, but in a single rapid emergent event that built upon those prior systems but was not predicted by them. The relatively sudden origin of language poses difficulties that may be called Darwin's problem. And so the bottom line is this: that as human beings, we really truly are exceptional, that we really truly are unique compared to all other creatures, and that we have attributes scientifically that distinguish us from other creatures that we could understand as, again, a manifestation of the image of God. And so from a Christian worldview perspective, if we hold to the view that human beings are image bearers, and because we're image bearers, we have infinite worth and value, and that all human beings have infinite worth and value, that this is an idea that is not just simply an idea that flows out of a commitment to a particular religious text. This is an idea that actually finds support within the scientific characterization of human beings and within the study of the origin of humanity. And from my perspective, this insight is something that is worth celebrating.